Lin Yu, take your useless gold and get the hell out of my squad. The cold edge of a blade pressed a fraction of an inch from my throat. The man holding it, Zhang Feng, the captain of our survivor squad, glared down at me as if I were a piece of absolute filth. 3 years into the apocalypse, my ability had finally awakened, the Midas Touch. Not metaphorically, but literally. I could turn any stone into 24-karat pure gold. It sounded like a godly power, but in a wasteland where human life was cheaper than dirt and a single pack of biscuits could buy a woman, this was the most useless ability on Earth. Captain Zhang, please, don't do this. Standing in front of me, my older sister, Lin Wan, threw her arms wide, shielding me with her body. Her voice trembled, on the verge of tears. He just needs a little time. He'll grow stronger. Get stronger? With that garbage? Zhang Feng scoffed. Flames danced across his fingertips, illuminating his handsome, yet twisted face. Lin Wan, the only reason I keep you around is for your aquagenesis ability. We need your water, not your useless parasite of a brother. We haven't had food in 3 days. We can't afford to feed a freeloader who only knows how to make shiny rocks. We were trapped on the top floor of an abandoned shopping mall. Below us, thousands of zombies roamed the lower levels. Hunger clamped down on everyone's throats like an invisible hand, magnifying the ugliest, most venomous sides of human nature. Kick him out. Use him to draw the horde's aggro. Another squad member, a morbidly obese man named Fatty, barked. A cruel, greedy glint flashed in his eyes. We can use the distraction to make a break for it. Yeah, throw him out. The rest of the squad glared at me like a pack of starving wolves. To them, I wasn't a comrade. I was just a piece of bait to buy them a few more minutes of life. A numbing chill washed over me. I tightly gripped the pebble I had just transmuted into gold. It was cold and heavy, a perfect mirror of my heart. My sister's body was shaking violently, but she didn't back down. If you want to throw him to the monsters, you'll have to kill me first. Zhang Feng's expression instantly darkened. He stared at my sister's beautiful face, then at her hands. Hands capable of conjuring life-saving clean water out of thin air. Finally, he sheathed his blade. Fine. For your sake, I'll give him one last chance, he hissed through his teeth. Tomorrow, he comes with us to scavenge for food. If he slows us down, or if he can only produce more of this useless trash. He violently kicked the gold nugget at my feet. It rolled across the concrete floor, emitting a dull, heavy thud. Then both of you can go down and serve yourselves up as dinner for the horde. Night fell. Leaning against the icy concrete wall, I listened to my sister's muffled sobbing and the malicious whispers of our teammates. Looking out the window under the pale moonlight, the endless ocean of shambling corpses below looked like a dense, hopeless forest. I hated it. I hated this godforsaken wasteland, and I hated my own utterly pathetic self even more. Dawn brought no hope, only a deeper descent into hell. Our so-called breakout plan was a setup from the very beginning. Zhang Feng's target was never the zombie-infested supermarket in the distance. It was the woman behind us, my sister, Lin Wan. Now, do it. As we navigated a narrow fire escape, Zhang Feng suddenly turned on my sister. Instead of attacking, he grabbed her by the shoulders and, with a violent shove, threw her through a gap in the rusted railing. Oh! My sister's piercing scream sliced through the air like a red-hot iron, shattering my eardrums. She slammed into a mountain of garbage 10 feet below, her ankle twisting at a sickening, unnatural angle. The agonizing pain made it impossible for her to stand. Her fall was like throwing a boulder into a placid lake, instantly alerting every zombie in the vicinity. Zhang Feng, you son of a bitch. Blood rushed to my eyes. I tried to charge forward like a madman, but Fatty pinned my arms from behind, locking me in a vice grip. Don't be a fool, Lin Yu. Fatty hissed into my ear, a trace of twisted excitement in his voice. This is the only way. With your sister acting as the perfect bait, the rest of us can actually make it out alive. I stared across the gap at Zhang Feng. He stood at the far end of the passage, completely devoid of remorse. Instead, his face wore the cold, calculated smirk of a victor who had just executed a flawless checkmate. He even smiled at me. Watch closely, Lin Yu. This is the law of the wasteland, Zhang Feng called out coldly. The weak exist solely to serve as stepping stones for the strong. Your sister's sacrifice is an honor. Roar. Like sharks smelling blood in the water, the zombie horde converged on my sister from all directions. She struggled to crawl away, but her shattered ankle anchored her to the spot. She looked up at me. There was no terror in her eyes, only endless, suffocating worry and love. Silently, her lips formed a final, unvoiced command. Live. No. No. My mind went entirely blank, my blood freezing in my veins. I watched in absolute horror as the first zombie tackled her to the ground, followed by a second, a third. Crimson blood stained her white summer dress, blossoming like a tragic death lily amidst the filth. In that fraction of a second, my entire world imploded. Zhang Feng and the others vanished down the corridor without looking back. Fatty finally released his grip, giving me a violent shove toward the edge before he ran. Go join your sister, you useless trash. I stumbled forward, collapsing against the broken railing, staring down at the mangled, blood-soaked hell below. My sister's silhouette had already been completely swallowed by the feeding frenzy. My heart died right then and there. An apocalyptic wave of pure, unfiltered hatred erupted from the ashes of my soul like a volcano. I am going to kill them. I will slaughter every single one of them. Just then, a decayed, rotting hand clamped around my ankle from behind. I turned my head, locking eyes with the contorted, ravenous face of a zombie. The brutal wilderness of the apocalypse is the ultimate forge. It burns away a man's innocence and weakness until nothing but ash remains. I didn't die after escaping that shopping mall. The raw instinct to survive and the burning desire for vengeance acted like twin pillars, forcefully keeping my broken soul and body upright. I became a solo scavenger, a lone wolf drifting through the skeletal remains of the city. By day, I hid in the shadows like a rat, digging for forgotten cans of food and bottled water. By night, I barricaded myself in the most secure corners I could find, using broken furniture to block the doors, spending the entire night grinding and refining my ability. I quickly mapped out the underlying mechanics of my power. Midas Touch was fundamentally a system of equivalent exchange. The price I paid was my own life force, my stamina, mental energy, and potentially my lifespan. The larger the mass of the object I transmuted, the more catastrophic the toll on my body. I had once attempted to completely transmute the skull of an infected zombie. The result was an immediate blackout. I didn't wake up until 3 days later, and when I looked at my reflection, I found a streak of prematurely white hair tracking down my temple. I understood then. This was a suicidal power. But to a dead man walking, a man living solely for vengeance, it was a holy gift from the heavens. I abandoned large-scale transmutations, pivoting instead toward precise, lethal applications. I turned small pebbles into solid gold beads. Their extreme weight and density made them the perfect ammunition. With a flick of my wrist, a gold bead could precisely pierce through a zombie's rotten eye socket from 50 yards away. I turned sand into fine gold dust, throwing it into the wind during escapes. The gold dust caught the sunlight, creating a blinding glare that instantly short-circuited the zombie's dull vision, buying me precious seconds. I even mastered delayed transmutation. I would hold a stone, channel my life force into it, but delay the final transformation. It became a timed kinetic bomb. A few seconds after being thrown, it would violently snap into a massive, heavy block of solid gold. I once used this trick to collapse a structural advertising billboard from a high vantage point, instantly crushing a dozen zombies underneath. My combat efficiency sharpened through endless brushes with death. I was no longer the boy who needed his sister's protection. My gaze had become as cold and hollow as an apocalyptic winter. I ate moldy crackers and drank hoarded rainwater. The only thing keeping me upright was the memory of Zhang Feng's cold, mocking smile etched into my soul. I had to find him. I began tracking human activity, tailing small groups of survivors, and piecing together intel from their hushed conversations. Finally, a month later, I overheard a name that made my blood run hot. Did you hear? Fire god Zhang Feng is a major celebrity over in Hope City now. His flame manipulation is absolutely insane. Yeah, I heard he pulled off a massive contribution right after joining. He's already the vice captain of the elite hunting squad. Hope City. Zhang Feng. Hiding in the shadows, My fingernails dug deeply into my palms. Hanging around my neck was my sister's sole remaining keepsake, a tiny jade pendant. It seemed to sense the murderous intent raging in my chest, turning scorching hot against my skin. I lifted my head and looked toward the north. There lay one of the largest human strongholds in the wasteland, the final destination of my vengeance, my personal hunting ground. The road to Hope City was a corridor of death. The closer I got to the mega stronghold, the denser the zombie hordes became, and the higher the tier of the mutants. I once encountered a 10-foot-tall tyrant zombie with skin as rigid as solid granite. My gold beads did nothing but spark against its hide. Ultimately, I had to burn through nearly half of my remaining life force to instantly transmute a section of the concrete beneath its feet into solid gold. The sudden, massive weight disparity completely threw off its balance, causing it to crash down and allowing me to barely escape. The price for that escape was a deep, bone-deep claw wound across my left arm, and another massive patch of my hair turned snow white. But it was worth it. Pushing my limits allowed me to manipulate my ability with absolute precision. I discovered I could control not just the timing of the transmutation, but its physical form. Once, while being pursued by a pack of hyper-agile Ripper zombies, I threw a handful of dirt into the air in a panic, using my mind to forge it into a gold foil net as thin as a cicada's wing. The gold net materialized instantly in midair, perfectly draping over the pack. Their razor-sharp talons could easily tear through reinforced steel, yet they were entirely immobilized, hopelessly entangled by the ductile, high-precious metal. Gold's natural malleability became the ultimate restraint. I began integrating more versatile tactics. I turned a pebble into a miniature gold mirror, using light reflection to scout enemy positions within complex structural ruins. I turned a scrap of wire into a micro-thin gold needle, using it to silently pick locked doors and access pristine supply caches. I even learned to transmute water into gold in a split second. Once, in a marshland, I ran into a hostile bandit squad trying to roll me for my gear. I feigned compliance, handing over my canteen. The moment their leader grabbed it, I activated my power. The water inside instantly transformed into a 30-pound solid gold weight. The sudden drop smashed his wrist to splinters. They stared at me in sheer terror, as if looking at a demon. Midas Touch, the ability mocked by everyone as a joke, had become a high-art form of execution in my hands. Gold was the ultimate bait. I would intentionally leave a small gold nugget on a road and wait in the shadows. Sure enough, well-geared scavengers would discover it, drop their guard to fight over who owned it, and allow me to execute them one by one, turning their stashes into my loot. Gold was the ultimate trap. I would program a delayed transformation on a stone along a zombie migration route. When the horde tripped over the sudden heavy weight, it triggered a massive pileup, creating a perfect window for me to strike or slip away. Gold was the ultimate weapon. Cold, heavy, and merciless, just like my heart. After a month of grueling travel, I was like a piece of iron that had been repeatedly hammered on the anvil. All impurities had been burned away, leaving only a hardened core. A jagged scar now tracked across my face, and my eyes were completely dead. Finally, on the horizon, a colossal fortress crafted from steel and concrete emerged. Hope City. Zhangfeng, I'm here. I've come to toll your death knell. When I dragged my battered body to the towering iron gates of Hope City, I realized this place wasn't a sanctuary. It was just a highly stratified, merciless layer of hell. Heavy machine guns and searchlights lined the towering perimeter walls. Guards in pristine uniforms stared down with cold indifference at the masses below, who looked like insects begging for entry. Entry fee, 30 units of food, or 10 tier. 1 corpse course, the registrar at the gate shouted mechanically, his voice dripping with impatience. 30 units of food could sustain an ordinary person for a month if rationed carefully. 10 tier. 1 course meant risking your life to hollow out the skulls of the infected. This steep price effectively locked out the vast majority of survivors struggling on the brink of starvation. I saw absolute despair. A mother holding a feverish child knelt in the dirt, begging for mercy, only to be callously kicked aside by a guard. A man whose cores weren't high quality enough had his legs broken on the spot and was tossed outside the perimeter to rot. There was no pity here, only raw, unadulterated jungle law. I stood at the back of the queue, analyzing everything. I knew that in my current state, I looked no different from a common wandering scavenger. I couldn't expose my ability, especially not in a playground ruled by the powerful. If Midas Touch was discovered, I wouldn't become a hero. I would be locked in a cage, transformed into a permanent asset to indefinitely churn out gold for the ruling class. It was my turn. Name. The registrar barked, still looking down. Linyu. Ability. None. I chose to lie. In a world where espers ruled, a powerless ordinary citizen was the lowest form of scum. But it was also the ultimate camouflage. The registrar finally lifted his head, sweeping a derogatory glance across my frame. The look in his eyes was identical to the look Zhang Feng had given me 3 years ago. No ability? Then what right do you have to enter the city? Where's your entry fee? Remaining silent, I opened my battered backpack, pulled out an item, and lightly set it on the desk. It wasn't food, and it wasn't a core. It was a tiny nugget of gold, no larger than a fingernail, yet so pure it possessed absolutely zero impurities. The registrar's breathing instantly hitched. For the first time, a frantic, greedy glint exploded within his dead eyes. The surrounding guards subconsciously closed in, their gazes burning hot. In the apocalypse, gold couldn't be eaten, but to the ruling class holding the reins of power, it remained the ultimate symbol of status and authority. It was a totem of the old world, a demon capable of triggering humanity's most primal desires. Where did you get this? The registrar's voice quivered slightly. Scavenged it. I replied expressionlessly. An abandoned jewelry store. This was the only piece left. He stared fiercely into my eyes, trying to detect a hint of a lie. But my heart was already a dead, frozen wasteland. He couldn't pry a single flaw out of me. Silence. A heavy, prolonged silence. Ultimately, greed triumphed over protocol. The registrar snatched the gold nugget into his palm and impatiently waved his hand. Get in. Remember to keep your head down inside. Ordinary people need to act like ordinary people. I didn't say a word. I just hoisted my pack and walked through the heavy iron gate. The moment I stepped inside the stronghold, I glanced back over my shoulder. The registrar was biting down on the gold nugget, testing its gauge with his teeth, an intoxicated smile plastered across his face. He had no idea that he hadn't just let in a submissive lamb. He had unleashed a starving wolf bent on total annihilation. The interior of Hope City was entirely different from what I had visualized. There was no order here, only sectors brutally partitioned by raw power. The outermost ring was the slums, a breeding ground for ordinary citizens like me. It was a chaotic mess of low shanties and tents, filthy, lawless, and thick with the stench of rot and despair. Deeper inside lay the functional district, housing a crude trading market, the Esper Guild, and the recruitment offices for the hunting squads. This was the beating heart of the stronghold, vibrant yet dripping with blood and conspiracy. And at the absolute core lay the noble district, walled off by an inner perimeter. Supposedly, that was where the supreme leaders of the stronghold lived, alongside high-tier espers who possessed massive strength and authority, men like Zhang Feng. There, they had clean apartments, abundant food, and luxury entertainment from the old world. One stronghold, 2 worlds. Like a drop of water, I silently dissolved into the murky ocean of the slums. I traded the last of my actual food for a dilapidated shack that could barely block the wind and rain, and began my intelligence gathering. The slums were the most chaotic place, but also the place where information flowed freest. I visited the market daily, never trading, only listening. Listening to the chatter of scavengers, mercenaries, and desperate women. Soon, the pieces of Zhang Feng's life came together like a mosaic. Fire god Zhang Feng, an A-rank flame manipulator, and the vice captain of Crimson Pyre, one of the stronghold's 3 elite hunting squads. He lived high profile, operated with ruthless efficiency, and because of his immense strength, he knew how to win people over. His prestige within the stronghold was sky high. I even saw his photograph pinned to a public notice board. In the picture, he wore elite tactical armor, a blazing sphere of heat crackling at his fingertips, his face wearing that exact same confident, cold smirk that was burned into my soul. He was flanked by powerful espers, and among them was Fatty's disgusting face. They were living the good life. Way too good. Every time I heard his name, every time I looked at his picture, the scene of my sister's brutal death replayed in my mind like a movie loop. That visceral, agonizing pain became the coldest fuel, making the fire of my vengeance burn hotter. But I didn't let the hatred cloud my judgment. I knew that right now, the gap between us was the difference between heaven and earth. He was a revered hero sitting above the clouds. I was a rat hiding in the sewers, avoiding the light. A direct confrontation would be suicide. I needed an opening, an opportunity to get close to him without raising his suspicion. I needed an invisible blade to plunge into his heart. To achieve that, I had to survive first, and I had to look like a genuine, ordinary citizen. I began taking the lowest, filthiest jobs available, clearing the sewers, hauling corpses, repairing the perimeter walls. The work was toxic, exhausting, and paid a pittance, but it gave me maximum access to every facet of the stronghold, allowing me to understand its mechanics. No one notices a sewer worker. No one cares about a body hauler. Under this perfect camouflage, I was like a spider, silently spinning my web within this massive fortress, an invisible web woven from hatred, patience, and pure gold. And Zhang Feng was the arrogant moth about to fly straight into it. Opportunities always manifest in the humblest forms when you least expect them. That day, I was at the edge of the slums, processing a batch of corpses that had died from black spot disease. This was a plague far more terrifying than a standard zombie bite. It caused a living human to slowly rot away in extreme agony until they reanimated as a mindless walking corpse. The bodies reeked of decay, and everyone avoided the area like the plague. Wearing a crude cloth mask, I numbly dragged the rigid corpses onto a cremation truck. Right then, a squad wearing the Crimson Pyre uniform marched up to the cremation pit, dragging a man who had been beaten half to death. Leading the squad was Fatty. He was even heavier than before, but far more brutal, his eyes filled with the arrogant swagger of a lowlife who had made it big. He caught sight of me, but merely swept a disgusted glance over my frame as if I were a fly, before snapping his head away. He didn't recognize me at all. The weeping, begging boy in his memories looked nothing like the mud-caked, dead-eyed corpse collector standing before him. "Throw him in," Fatty ordered his men. The beaten man let out a terrified wail. "No, Fatty, please. I was wrong. I'll never hide corpse cores again. Please, give me a chance. I don't want to die. A chance." Fatty sneered, slamming his boot into the man's face. "When you were hoarding those cores, did you think about giving Captain Zhang a chance? Do you have any idea how many credit points we lost because of the 3-tier, 2 cores you failed to hand over?" He reached into his vest, pulled out an item, and flashed it in front of the dying man's eyes. It was a small coin, radiating a soft, gentle golden light. "See this?" Fatty bragged, his tone dripping with vanity. "This is a purification coin that Captain Zhang went to great lengths to secure from the High Lords in the Noble District. Just one of these can sanitize a small zone infected by the black spot virus. Originally, this was meant for trash like you to use after clearing the cremation pits to keep yourself clean. Now, you don't get the privilege." My heart violently spasmed. A purification coin, gold, can neutralize the black spot virus? This single piece of intel was like a lightning bolt, violently illuminating the darkness in my mind. I understood. I finally understood the true, irreplaceable value of my Midas Touch ability in this ruined world. It wasn't meant to be used as a blunt weapon or mere currency. It was a tool of salvation. Fatty and his men callously threw the screaming man into the burning pit, then impatiently tossed the gold coin to the cremation foreman. "Take it. Sanitize the air around here. Damn it, the stench is killing me." The foreman thanked him profusely. Once the squad left, the foreman carefully placed the gold coin onto a stone slab near the pit and ordered everyone to back away. The moment the coin made contact with the slab, it began radiating a faint, golden aura. Wherever the aura brushed, the invisible, lethal viral pathogens in the air melted away like ice under a scorching sun. The nauseating stench of decay thinned out at a visible rate. Everyone stared at the coin with deep reverence and longing. But for me, once the initial shock passed, what flooded my chest was an infinite wave of wild ecstasy and icy, calculated bloodlust. "Zhang Feng, You used my sister's life to buy your status. You used the blood of the masses to secure your luxury. You think you control everything. But you have no idea that the divine authority capable of dictating your fate, and the fate of this entire stronghold, is currently resting in the hands of a corpse collector you view as an insect. Staring at the dissolving gold coin, a beautifully wicked, calculated plot locked into place within my mind. The web had finally found its anchor thread. I began a series of unhinged experiments. By night, inside my shanty, I lit a dim oil lamp. I had brought back a patch of soil lightly contaminated with the black spot virus from the cremation pits. Channeling my ability, I transformed a tiny pebble into a grain of gold sand. Holding my breath, I used a pair of tweezers to carefully place the gold sand onto the contaminated soil. A miracle occurred. Identical to what I had witnessed at the cremation pit, the gold sand radiated a faint yet distinct golden aura. Under its light, the dark purple lesions representing the viral strain within the soil slowly receded and vanished. It actually works. The ability mocked by everyone, including myself, as a complete joke, was the one and only cure to the wasteland's deadliest plague. The revelation made my entire body shake with excitement. But that thrill was rapidly replaced by a calculated calmness. I didn't just hold a winning hand. I held a double-edged sword. Handle it right, and it would send Zhang Feng straight to hell. Handle it wrong, and it would drag me into the abyss first. I couldn't expose myself. Before I possessed enough raw power to dictate my own destiny, I had to be more cautious than ever. Capitalizing on my job as a body hauler, I began secretly harvesting items heavily contaminated with the black spot virus. I dug a deep cellar beneath my shanty to store them. Then, I used my meager wages to buy basic chemical reagents and glass apparatus from the trading market. Day after day, like a manic alchemist in a dungeon, I ran my purification experiments. I discovered that gold's neutralizing efficacy scaled linearly with its purity and the amount of life force I injected during transmutation. A small nugget of pure gold forged with everything I had possessed a curing radius vastly superior to Zhang Feng's purification coins, which were alloyed and diluted with cheaper metals. I also discovered that this purification wasn't a free lunch. Every activation consumed the gold itself. A fingernail-sized piece of gold would visibly shrink and thin out after purging an area, eventually dissolving into nothing. It wasn't a catalyst. It was a consumable asset. This discovery made my wicked plot clearer and more viable. Hope City was like a massive, airtight tin can. While its walls could keep the zombies out, it completely stagnant locked the air circulation inside. Once the black spot plague erupted internally, especially within the high-density, low-sanitation slums, it would become an unstoppable, apocalyptic disaster. And when that time came, purification gold, the only thing capable of saving humanity, would become an asset more violently fought over than food or weapons. And I would be the sole, exclusive source of gold on Earth. I began systematically channeling my failed experimental waste, materials that still carried microdoses of the active virus, into the slum's water supply via the sewer network. I operated with absolute stealth, keeping the dosages incredibly low. It wouldn't trigger an immediate, massive outbreak. Instead, it acted like a series of timed bombs quietly planted beneath the city's foundation. I was weaponizing the plague. I was manufacturing terror. To secure my vengeance, I was transforming into a demon far more ruthless than Zhang Feng or the apocalypse itself. Looking into the cracked mirror at my youthful face, now lined with hollow weariness and framed by an increasing amount of white hair, I asked myself, if Juan could see me now, would she still recognize me? Would she still be proud of her little brother? The reflection offered no answer. It merely wore a cold, calculated smirk, identical to Zhang Feng's. The fuse was ignited far sooner than I anticipated. Isolated reports of unexplained low fevers and skin rashes began popping up across the slums. Initially, no one cared. In the wasteland, being sick was just a part of life. But soon, the first infected individual turned into a zombie quietly in his sleep, violently mauling the family sleeping next to him. Screams shattered the dead silence of dawn in the slums. The black spot plague erupted like water dropped into boiling oil. The high lords of the stronghold immediately deployed the most draconian measures. Squads of heavily armed guards swarmed into the slums, violently dragging away anyone showing suspected symptoms, regardless of age or gender, to the quarantine zone. The so-called quarantine was merely locking them inside sealed iron cages to wait for death or mutation. Overnight, the slums devolved into a theater of paranoia and terror. Neighbors who were drinking and swapping stories yesterday were dragged away as rigid corpses today. The fear of an invisible, silent executioner was far more mentally breaking than facing a zombie tide. And I, the architect of it all, continued playing my role as the silent body hauler. I personally loaded the people I had indirectly infected onto the cremation trucks, my heart completely flat. I needed a bigger catalyst. A disruption massive enough to destabilize Zhang Feng's authority and shatter the ruling class's foundation. I locked my targets onto the Crimson Pyre hunting squad. As one of the Stronghold's elite units, they ventured outside daily, making them more exposed to mutations and pathogens than anyone else. While clearing the trash from their military barracks, I slipped a scrap of cloth heavily saturated with the concentrated virus strain inside a tactical boot. The boot belonged to one of Zhang Feng's most trusted lieutenants, a powerful C-rank Earth Esper renowned for his ferocity. 3 days later, during a victory banquet, the lieutenant suddenly began violently convulsing in front of the entire assembly, his skin rotting away at a visible rate. The entire banquet hall went dead silent. For the first time, Zhang Feng's face turned completely pale. His most elite warrior, a high-tier Esper, had contracted the black spot plague inside the secure stronghold. This meant the virus was no longer confined to the insect-like citizens of the slums. It had begun reaching its claws into the heart of the stronghold, targeting the high and mighty. The incident was like a massive boulder crashed into a stagnant pond, triggering a tidal wave. Panic struck the noble district for the first time. The pampered lords began frantically buying up the meager supply of purification coins on the market. The price of gold spiked tenfold overnight, turning into an asset that couldn't be bought for any amount of resources. Zhang Feng's authority suffered its first real blow. He was responsible for the perimeter security of the stronghold, yet he couldn't even guarantee the safety of his own men. Many began questioning his capability in the shadows. Hiding in the dark, I watched it all with a cold smile. I knew this was just the first fissure in the wall. Next, I would personally tear this crack into an unbridgeable chasm. To stabilize his position and quell the panic in the noble district, Zhang Feng made a desperate, yet completely predictable, move. He announced that Crimson Pyre would temporarily halt all external hunting operations. Instead, the entire squad would deploy to the border between the slums and the functional district to enforce the quarantine line, ensuring not a single slum dweller crossed into the inner rings. This move effectively pushed his elite forces into direct, violent opposition with the entire survivor population of the slums. The conflict exploded instantly. Why the hell can't we cross? We aren't sick. I just have a regular cough. Why are you locking me in a cage? You high and mighty Espers don't give a damn about our lives. Driven to the absolute brink by the terror of the virus and the systemic injustice, the slum dwellers began charging the Crimson Pyre barricades. Zhang Feng's response was simple and barbaric. Anyone breaching the quarantine line is to be executed on the spot. He executed the first kill himself, launching a roaring fireball that instantly turned the leading man into a charred corpse. The horrific sight temporarily subdued the rioting crowd, but it planted a deep seed of absolute hatred in everyone's heart. The plague I had manufactured was evolving into a full-scale class war. And amidst the chaos, I found my next target, Fatty. As Zhang Feng's primary lapdog, Fatty was naturally deployed to enforce the quarantine. He was more tyrannical than ever, leveraging his authority to abuse the unarmed citizens, beating and kicking anyone who didn't move fast enough. I tracked him for 2 full days, mapping out his routines. He had a secret habit. Every midnight, he would sneak past the barricade line to an abandoned warehouse to gorge himself on fine wine and food he had extorted from the slums. That night, I sneaked into the warehouse ahead of time. I placed a pebble imbued with delayed transmutation along his pathing line. Then, I suspended a small vial of concentrated viral fluid directly above the rafters, positioned right over his designated drinking chair. Fatty arrived right on schedule, humming a tune. The split second his boot stepped onto the pebble, I triggered the ability. The stone instantly transformed into an irregular, heavy block of solid gold. Caught completely off guard, his footing slipped, and he slammed heavily onto the floor. As he lifted his head to curse, I snapped a gold bead through the air, precisely shattering the viral vial on the rafters. The vial exploded, drenching Fatty from head to toe in the murky, foul green fluid. What the hell is this? Fatty screamed in terror, frantically trying to wipe the liquid off his face, but it was already too late. The pathogen seemed alive, tunneling into his body through his mouth, nose, eyes, and ears. Dark purple spots began spreading across his skin at a visible rate. Realizing what had just happened, absolute, paralyzing terror filled his face. He tried to scream for help, but his throat could only emit a ragged, hollow grunt, exactly like a shambling zombie. I slowly stepped out from the shadows. When Fatty saw my face, his pupils dilated completely, as if he had just seen a ghost. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his mouth opening and closing, desperately trying to speak, but no sound came out. Surprised, I walked up to him, staring down at his writhing form. My voice was completely flat. Remember my sister? When she died, her pain was 10,000 times worse than what you're feeling right now. I didn't kill him. Instead, I turned around, closed the heavy warehouse doors, and used a reinforced steel bar to lock it firmly from the outside. Then, I calmly returned to my shanty. I knew that tomorrow, when the stronghold discovered that the #2 commander of Crimson Pyre had contracted the black spot plague in its most horrific form inside his own quarantine zone, the entire stronghold would fall into unhinged madness. Zhang Feng, this is just the interest on the debt. The real show is about to begin. Fatty's death was the spark that detonated the powder keg. When his corpse was discovered, the sight of his completely decayed, unrecognizably distorted face sent a visceral wave of terror through everyone's soul. Internal panic fractured Crimson Pyre. If their second-in-command wasn't immune, how could the rank-and-file soldiers expect to survive? Military morale shattered in an instant. Zhang Feng's prestige suffered an unprecedented blow. He was completely furious, ordering a total investigation, but against an invisible, untrackable virus, his devastating flame manipulation was completely useless. He could only watch helplessly as paranoia spread through his ranks like a wildfire. Meanwhile, after the initial shock passed, the slum dwellers felt a twisted, vindictive joy. Karma. It's goddamn karma. They treated us like cattle, and now the plague is coming for them. The long-suppressed rage detonated. Mass riots erupted across the slums. The survivors stopped merely testing the lines. They began committing arson, looting supply centers, and ambushing isolated guards. Hope City descended into a chaotic, internal civil war. And I, the invisible corpse collector, watched the roaring fire I had lit with an indifferent gaze. It was time to execute the final phase of my plan. I leaked a rumor. Using the most connected black market brokers and women in the slums, I quietly slipped a secret into the grapevine. Did you hear? The high lords in the noble district aren't afraid of the black spot plague at all. They have holy amulets forged from pure gold. As long as you wear one, you're completely immune to all toxins. The rumor was meticulously detailed. I even added embellishments based on the scene where Fatty had bragged about his purification coins. Gold, a word that had long lost its value in the wasteland, overnight gained a divine, life-saving halo. Greed and the fear of death are the twin catalysts of the apocalypse. When they fuse, they strip humanity of all logic. The rumor spread like a digital virus, outpacing the black spot plague itself. Even the espers in the functional district who were originally loyal to Zhang Feng began to waver. They were bleeding and dying to enforce the borders, while the nobles hid in the core, enjoying the safety of golden amulets. Injustice and jealousy are the sharpest blades to sever an alliance. Zhang Feng was drowning in chaos. He had to suppress the riots in the slums, soothe the paranoia within his own unit, and now, handle the pressure and suspicion coming from rival Esper factions. He issued public broadcasts fiercely condemning the rumors as complete nonsense, but his explanations sounded incredibly weak against the backdrop of mass panic and greed. To prove himself, He was forced to pull all the actual purification coins remaining in the stronghold's reserves and distribute them to his core inner circle. But that was like drinking poison to quench a thirst. Those few dozen coins failed to calm the masses. Instead, they validated the rumor's core claim. Those who didn't receive a coin grew even more resentful. The Order of Hope City was on the brink of total collapse. Everyone glared toward the walled-off noble district like starving wolves. They truly believed that inside those walls lay mountains of hidden gold capable of saving their lives. I knew the fruit was ripe. It was time to draw the final, bloody curtain on this grand theater. The final straw that broke the camel's back came from outside the stronghold. Just as internal tensions hit a boiling point and civil war was about to detonate, a shrill, piercing alarm echoed across the entire fortress. It was an alarm more frantic and desperate than anything heard before. Warning! Warning! Ultra-colossal zombie, horde detected. Repeat. Ultra-colossal zombie, horde detected. On top of the towering outer wall, the lookout soldier's voice was heavily distorted by pure terror, broadcasting into every corner of the city. Numbers, unquantifiable. At least 1 million. 1 million. The number hit everyone's heart like a sledgehammer. Hope City claimed to be one of the strongest fortresses in the wasteland, but its structural defense threshold was 300,000. A horde of 1 million zombies was enough to violently crush the stronghold and everyone's hopes into absolute dust. All internal conflicts, all class wars, all plots became hilariously insignificant in that fraction of a second. Absolute, unyielding death descended equally upon every single head. I scaled the highest rooftop ruin in the slums, looking out into the distance. At the edge of the horizon, a black line materialization. The line widened and thickened at a visible rate, like a massive ocean of black ink swallowing the earth. It was the horde, an endless, infinite sea of zombies. They fused into a black, reeking torrent, making the earth violently tremble beneath their advance. The deafening, synchronous roar from a million decayed throats formed the ultimate symphony of the end times. The stronghold's heavy machine guns began to roar furiously, pouring a hail of lead into the tide. But it was like throwing pebbles into the ocean. Aside from creating a few insignificant ripples, it did absolutely nothing to halt the tsunami. Despair blanketed the fortress like a thick storm cloud. People began weeping, some dropped to their knees to pray, and others simply gave up, downing poisons they had stashed away. And Zhang Feng, the great hero of the stronghold, stood upon the outer wall. I could see his tiny silhouette from a distance. He was still screaming commands, launching massive, roaring fireballs that exploded into brief gaps within the tide. But against a million-strong horde, his proud A-rank ability looked like a complete joke. I knew he was terrified, because his proud power was entirely fragile against a literal natural disaster. But I was different. Staring at the encroaching black ocean that could make the gods themselves shiver, I took a deep, deep breath. I felt zero fear. On the contrary, what filled my chest was an unprecedented, almost psychotic wave of pure excitement. Because I had waited for this exact moment for far too long. The weakest, most garbage ability mocked by everyone had finally found its most magnificent and most ruthless stage. Zhang Feng, watch closely. See whose power actually deserves to be called a miracle. See who is the one to deliver the final judgment upon this rotten world. The gate is breaking. Accompanied by a sickening screech of twisting metal, the stronghold's heavy iron gate, reinforced to withstand a tank charge, cracked open under the suicidal momentum of a million zombies. The shadow of death choked everyone. On the wall, Zhang Feng's face was as white as a sheet. He was still frantically channeling his power, but his flames were growing increasingly dim and weak. He had completely overdrawn his energy reserves. Just as humanity plummeted into the deepest abyss of despair, a lone figure slowly stepped out from the crowded ruins of the slums. It was me. Step by step, navigating against the panicked flow of fleeing citizens, I walked toward that crumbling outer wall. No one noticed me until I reached the base of the wall, standing right at the center of the massive breach. Who the hell is that guy? Is he insane? An ordinary citizen? Does he want to die? Under everyone's bewildered gazes, I slowly raised my right hand, and lightly pressed my palm flat against the earth beneath my feet. In that fraction of a second, the entire world seemed to go dead silent. I closed my eyes, feeling the cool gauge of my sister's jade pendant pressed against my chest. Juan, watch me. I took every ounce of life force accumulated in my body, all my hatred, all my agony, and all my love, and channeled it entirely into my ability without reserving a single drop. This wasn't just Midas Touch. This was the final movement I had composed for Zhang Feng, and for this godforsaken world. Golden Requiem. Well, with my palm acting as the epicenter, a golden ring of light violently radiated outward like a massive ripple. Wherever the ring brushed, the earth ceased to be soil and stone. Obeying no laws of physics, the terrain violently transmuted into the densest, heaviest matter on earth, solid gold. 1 yard, 10 yards, 100 yards. The golden tsunami tore through the foundation of the wall, surging straight into the black sea of corpses outside. The zombies violently slamming against the breach suddenly found the terrain beneath their claws transforming into a shifting, liquid swamp of molten gold. Their heavy bodies began sinking uncontrollably. But that was just the prologue. What the hell is that? Someone on the wall shrieked, as if they had just seen a demon. At the center of the external horde, the earth that had been turned to gold was rising upward at an unbelievable speed. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a mountain. A literal mountain crafted from solid, pure gold was breaking out from beneath the crust. Boom, crunch, rumble. The groaning of the earth drowned out all sound. A towering peak reflecting a brilliant, blinding golden light rose toward the sky with a brutal, world-forging dominance. Against this rising, immeasurably heavy golden mountain, the million-strong zombie horde looked like ants on a beach. They were easily launched into the air, torn to pieces, and then completely, ruthlessly buried alive beneath the expanding mass of the golden mountain. No screams, no struggle, only an absolute, eternal silence. The million-strong horde, a disaster capable of annihilating civilization, was completely suppressed and buried alive in front of everyone's eyes by a magnificent, absurd golden mountain created out of thin air. The entire world fell silent, save for the massive peak reflecting the piercing, divine sunlight. And beneath the mountain lay an eternal stillness representing 1,000,000 dead souls. Silence reigned beneath the golden mountain. On the stronghold walls, every single survivor, including Zhang Feng, stood like a hollow puppet with its soul ripped out, staring blankly at the absurdly majestic mountain of gold that belonged in a mythological epic. Their minds were an absolute blank. Their worldview had been violently, brutally shattered. And I stood at the base of that golden mountain, right at the boundary line between annihilation and creation. The catastrophic toll of the exchange hit me like a tidal wave. My hair turned snow white in a single second. My skin lost all vitality, turning into something resembling withered tree bark. My life force completely dried up, like a punctured balloon. I could feel my life ticking away, moving toward zero by the second. But I didn't collapse. Using the final shred of my remaining strength, I turned my body around and looked up at the silhouette standing paralyzed on the wall. Zhang Feng. Our gazes locked across the distance. The arrogance and cruelty in his eyes were completely gone, replaced by a primal, absolute terror and emptiness that was deeper than death itself. His proud flames looked like a microscopic speck of dust in front of this golden mountain. The jungle law of the strong devouring the weak that he so fervently believed in was a complete joke in the face of this absolute, godlike power. I didn't say a word. I merely lifted my arm toward him and slowly extended my middle finger. And then I smiled. A genuine smile from the bottom of my heart. Sister, did you see that? I avenged you. In this ruined world, the weakest ability isn't turning stone to gold. It's human nature. My vision began to blur. Just as I was about to plunge into the eternal dark, a warm pair of hands supported my frame. I forced my eyes open, catching a glimpse of the female researcher from the museum, the one I had spared before. Behind her, countless survivors were pouring down from the walls, having just escaped a death sentence. They looked at me with complex emotions, reverence, terror, gratitude, and greed. I didn't stay to see Zhang Feng's ultimate end. But I knew that a tyrant who had lost his power and prestige in a newly judged world would face a fate 100 times more miserable than death. My story seemed destined to end here. A sufficiently brutal, sufficiently perfect conclusion. However, when I opened my eyes again, I found myself lying in a soft bed. Outside the window lay a foreign, reconstructed skyline. The female researcher sat by my bedside, tightly holding a small jade pendant in her palms. It was my sister's pendant. "You've been in a coma for 3 months," she said softly. "We discovered that this pendant contains a highly peculiar life energy. It has been nurturing your body this entire time." I lifted my hand. It was no longer like withered tree bark. Though still pale, it possessed the warmth of life. At the roots of my white hair, a trace of black had begun to grow back. I had survived, in a way I had never imagined. I looked out the window. The colossal mountain of gold still towered in the distance like an eternal monument. I was born for hatred, and I had almost died for vengeance. But now, for the sake of my sister's final command, I had to truly live. My throne was forged from gold and ash. But my future would begin anew atop these ruins.